Hey there. In the last video, we put together a simple script to calculate CPK from a set of data, but it's not too useful. We had to hard code in our data that we wanted to check. We could only check one thing. So what we want to do is add an interface to something like Excel, which people are a lot more familiar with. So I have a, I guess, directory here where I've just got our script and a set of data that I put into Excel. It's going to look like this. Drawing that over there, where we have some type of unit or lot, a tester, categorical data that we don't really care about, and then we have a series of measurements here. So we have a measurement for width, we have a lower limit for width, and an upper limit for width. Then we have a measurement for height, and a lower limit for height, but no upper limit. This mimics the layout of data that I've seen in a couple places that I've worked at, where basically every item has every type of measurement. There's some different ways that things may be laid out, and actually, generally you spend most of your time trying to figure out the patterns in how your data is laid out, and the actual calculations are pretty straightforward. So the first thing we need to do with this is to figure out what type of pattern we have here. And we can see we have two variables that we want to check, width and height, and each one has a measurement value. It just says measurement, has a space, and then the name. Likewise, we have the same thing for our limits, where it'll say lower limit, space, and then the name of that measurement. So we're going to take advantage of that. So this file has 30 observations here, which is a good standard minimum to use for something like CPK. And using Pandas, we're going to get it into Python and be able to work with it a lot easier. So let's get started. First thing we want to do is import Pandas as PD. And then, actually, before I get too far into this, we're going to duplicate this file. And let's just call it CPK Excel. Since we're basically using the same thing, we just want to, make it a little bit better. And I'm going to close this out without saving. Okay. So let's import Pandas as PD. And we can make a quick function down here. We can get rid of our random data as well. And let's just make a function that we'll just call something like CPK report, where we'll take in a file name and a sheet name, which is important for Pandas. So we'll go ahead and make a data frame, and we're just going to call this PD read Excel. And we'll pass in that file name, and then we can select the sheet name, which we'll just call sheet, like that. And because we know the data, we wouldn't really need to do this, but we can set our index column equal to 0. And just to make sure this works, let's print that df head. And then at the bottom here, we can do CPK report. Our file name is going to be processdata.xlsx. And our sheet name, if I remember correctly, is case 1. I was planning on doing a couple of these for different types of data layouts. We'll see if I end up doing that. And let's just say case 1. And just to make sure this is working, there we go. And we see the first 5 records that are in that data frame. Perfect. So now that we can read in this Excel file, let's make a function that will determine what test we want to run. So let's just call it something like available tests. And we'll pass in a data frame, like so. And what we want here is to return the names of these tests. So we can look at each column in this data frame, but we want to know, like, okay, we don't care about this, we don't really care about this. We want to have a list that's going to say width and height. And this is a relatively clean set of data. Sometimes you're going to have other columns in here, like units, whatever. There's plenty out there. So let's go ahead and we can actually do this in one line with a little list comprehension. So knowing that measurements and a space is, I guess, 13 characters. If we start on the 12th index and then go 4, we can do something like this. And what this is going to do is take kind of that last chunk of each name in columns. But to make sure that we only grab kind of unique ones and ones that have measurements, we can put in an if statement here to filter that, where we can just look at the first part of it and say that that equals measurement, just like that. Oh, actually, let me put a space. Cool. So now down here in CPK report, let's just say that tests is going to equal available tests, and we'll pass in that data frame. And to make sure it's working, I don't need to print the head of a data frame now. I'm just going to print tests. And let's try this out and see. Cool. So now we know we have width and height in there. So we're off to a pretty good start. So now that we can identify which columns we want to perform, or which measurement names we want to perform CPK on, we're going to make one more function that let's just call package data. And this is just going to grab the relevant information out of our Excel sheet and then place it into our CPK function that we have up here. So for this, we're going to want to pass in our data frame and the test name, since we'll do this individually for each one. And we can just say our vals is going to equal data frame, and we can do a little bit of a trick here where we do this and let's say test name. So this will just make that name of the column that we saw earlier. And we only want to grab the last 30 records. So if there's, 100, 1,000, 10,000 items in here, we probably only care about the most recent data for our CPK values. And what we get from there, let's just put into a list, because this would return a series and we don't really want to work with that. We'll make a list. It makes it a lot easier because that's what we intended to put into CPK up here. Now to get our lower limit, let's just call it lower here. And we're going to do the same thing, like that. And this, because we only really need one value, we're going to turn this to a list right now, and we'll just grab the first one. This is assuming that our limits don't change throughout. I don't want to go into that. It's not hard to do. It's just a couple more lines, maybe like one more function to make sure that your limits are valid for the 30. Not really important for the scope of this, so we're just going to skip that. Let's just print a new line, and we can print that test name because we've got it. And now we'll do just a little bit of logic to see if we have an upper limit for that measurement. And we'll just do the same thing here, like that. And we can do a is this in the data frame columns, and that'll give us a true or false. And if so, we'll say that we do have this, which we can do the same thing we did for the lower limit. Like so. And now we're not really returning anything from CPK, and we don't really want to return anything from here, but this is an easy way to exit a function so we can get rid of some of the logic so that if there is an upper, it'll stop right here. But we're just going to call CPK with vals, lower, and upper. And assuming that we don't have that, and we make it down to here, we'll just return CPK. We don't really even need this return here, but whatever, let's be consistent. Just like that. So this works. We have a package data that's going to call this CPK function that we have up here that we know works. And let's just modify CPK report here to call that. So we have a list here that's tests that came from our available tests. So let's do something like for test in tests. And let's just do package data and pass in our data frame and that test. So now that we have all of this, let's try to run it one more time and see what we get. Cool. So we get a little space here. We can see, okay, width, this is our mean, their standard deviation. We have a CPL and a CPU because it's two-sided. And our height down here, we have the same general statistics, but we only have a CPK because it's a one-sided measurement. So, yeah, that's working. And you can see how just, adding a little bit more, this might be probably too complex for what it is, but trying to come up with every possible case helps when you run into real data where it's not as clean as, something like this. You'll notice that we also ignored, like our categorical data here. We could pull that in, but for this we don't really need to. But when we do gauge R&R, GR&R, our testers and our units that we're checking are actually going to be a lot more important. So we'll take those into account when we get there. But yeah, that's about it. CPK, not too bad, not as scary as a lot of people make it out to be. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.